At nearly 2.5 miles beneath the ocean's surface, the Titanic has rested in silence for well over a century. For the very first time, a sophisticated underwater drone has now ventured into its deepest, untouched chambers. Every major section becomes visible. And then you can move closer, pulling all the way into the finest detail. As the crew monitored things from above, they encountered images nobody had anticipated. With every pass of the drone, tension and unease grew steadily throughout the control room. What had begun as a straightforward scientific expedition quickly turned into something far more unsettling. By the time the drone arrived at its final target, every person on the team understood they had revealed a deeply troubling secret that had been buried in darkness for generations. Into the deep, the mission begins. The North Atlantic ranks among the most treacherous and unpredictable stretches of ocean on the planet. Its waters are notorious for storms that arrive without notice, temperatures that drop to near freezing, and powerful currents that shift in an instant. It was within this unforgiving environment that a research vessel dropped anchor hundreds of miles from any shoreline. On board was a carefully assembled team of specialists, gathered for a mission unlike anything attempted before, to examine the Titanic in greater depth and detail than had ever been possible. The wreck sits nearly 12,500 feet below the water's surface, a realm of absolute darkness and immense pressure where no human diver could possibly endure. The team had spent months getting ready. It brought together deep-sea archaeologists tasked with studying historical remains, marine engineers responsible for operating and maintaining the drone, skilled pilots to guide its descent, sonar experts to monitor and interpret readings, and preservation specialists dedicated to documenting the wreck without inflicting any damage. Every crew member fully grasped how critical precision was to the entire effort. The Titanic has sat underwater for more than a century, and even the slightest error could permanently harm its already fragile remains. At the heart of the mission was a purpose-built underwater drone. Prior to launching, the crew worked through a thorough final checklist, carefully examining the cameras, thrusters, and tether line to confirm everything was properly secured. The mood aboard the ship was tense, yet sharply focused. Once all checks were completed, the drone was gently lowered into the icy water below. From the control room, the team observed as its lights sliced through the deep blackness beneath them. As the drone made its descent, the screens displayed nothing but darkness at first. Then small particles began drifting across the camera's field of view, faintly illuminated by the drone's lights. Shortly after, the ocean floor came into view, strewn with scattered debris. Corroded metal fragments, decayed wood, and remnants of personal belongings lay exactly where they had come to rest on that devastating night in 1912. The sight was haunting, like a moment frozen forever in time. Then, through drifting clouds of silt, a vast dark shape began to take form. The bow of the Titanic slowly emerged from the shadows. Even after more than 100 years, its outline was instantly recognizable. Audible gasps spread through the control room as it appeared on their monitors. The drone moved carefully around the wreck, capturing every detail in full. With the exterior thoroughly mapped, the team turned their attention to the next phase, directing the drone into the interior of the Titanic, into areas that had been completely sealed off since the very night the vessel went down. Titanic, the legend in the grave. Long before it became a silent relic resting on the ocean floor, the Titanic was considered a triumph of engineering and human ambition. When it launched in 1912, it was celebrated worldwide as the largest and most luxurious ship ever built, a vessel designed to embody modern progress and extraordinary wealth. Its construction incorporated the most advanced technology of the era, including watertight compartments that led many to believe the ship was simply unsinkable. The Titanic stood as a symbol of human confidence and achievement at the dawn of the 20th century. Life aboard the ship reflected sharp divisions between social classes. First-class passengers were treated to lavish private suites, exclusive promenades, and dining rooms decorated to rival the grandest hotels across Europe. The ship's most celebrated feature was the Grand Staircase, a sweeping architectural showpiece built to inspire awe and project prestige. For those traveling in third class, however, the Titanic meant something altogether different. It represented possibility and hope, carrying immigrants who carried with them dreams of building a new life in America. For countless people, the Titanic represented far more than a vessel. It stood as a symbol of what humanity believed was possible. The ship set off on its first ever voyage on the 10th of April 1912, leaving from Southampton, England, with scheduled stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, before making its way westward across the Atlantic toward New York City. Those opening days at sea were calm and pleasant, full of anticipation and the comfortable rhythm of ocean travel. Then came the night of the 14th of April, when everything changed. The vessel struck an iceberg in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The impact dealt catastrophic harm to the hull, sending water rushing into several compartments simultaneously. In spite of the crew's desperate attempts to manage the flooding, it became painfully obvious that the ship was beyond saving. The hours that followed were defined by confusion and heartbreak. Those who survived later described the frantic scenes as passengers rushed toward the lifeboats. Families were separated in the desperate scramble to get away. There were remarkable acts of courage, certain individuals willingly surrendering their spots so that others might live, alongside devastating accounts of people fighting simply to stay alive. For anyone who ended up in the water, the bitter cold made survival nearly out of reach. When the Titanic finally disappeared beneath the surface in the early hours of the 15th of April, more than 1,500 souls were lost, cementing its place as one of the most devastating maritime tragedies ever recorded. The news spread across the globe through newspaper headlines, casting entire communities into deep grief. For more than 70 years, the wreck rested unseen in absolute darkness, buried almost 2.5 miles beneath the ocean surface. Many had come to believe it would remain lost forever. Then, in 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard and his research team located the wreck with the help of cutting-edge sonar equipment. The earliest photographs of the bow and the surrounding debris field left the world speechless and sparked a renewed worldwide obsession with the disaster. Numerous expeditions have returned to the site since then, though these visits have largely concentrated on the ship's exterior, given how extraordinarily delicate the interior has become. This new mission represents a genuinely significant shift in approach. Equipped with a purpose-built underwater drone, researchers intend to navigate through the Titanic's interior spaces for the very first time, sections that have sat in complete darkness for well over a century. The aim is to unearth fresh details about the ship's final moments, all while honoring the wreck as a lasting memorial to those who never made it home. Achieving the seemingly impossible required building something extraordinary. Sending a drone down to nearly 12,500 feet below the surface demands technology that goes far beyond anything used in typical underwater operations. At that kind of depth, the surrounding ocean presses in with immense force, hundreds of times the pressure experienced at the surface. Standard equipment would break down almost instantly under such conditions, its components failing and its connections dropping well before it could gather any worthwhile data. To meet this challenge head-on, engineers were given the task of designing a machine built from the ground up to function in one of the most punishing environments our planet has to offer. The drone's frame was constructed from titanium combined with other specially engineered alloys. These materials carry enough strength to withstand the immense crushing pressure of the deep ocean while staying light enough to allow for careful, precise movement. Every connection point and seal underwent repeated testing to confirm that water could not find its way inside. Even the tiniest imperfection had the potential to trigger total failure, destroying the drone and wiping out invaluable footage in an instant. To guard against this, the team incorporated multiple layers of safety measures into the design, also making it possible to retrieve the drone should anything go wrong mid-mission. Lighting presented its own set of difficulties that required equally thoughtful solutions. At the ocean floor, there is no light whatsoever. Sunlight simply cannot penetrate to those depths. The drone was equipped with high-powered LED lights capable of being adjusted across varying levels of intensity. That degree of precision mattered enormously because excessive brightness would disturb the silt and loose debris blanketing the wreck, stirring up a murky cloud that would obscure everything. The lights needed to be strong enough to reveal the Titanic's tight interior passages, yet controlled enough to avoid causing harm to the fragile objects and deteriorating structures found within. Navigating through the interior of the Titanic poses a genuinely extraordinary set of challenges. The walls are structurally compromised. Countless passageways stretch only a couple of feet across, and jagged shards of corroded metal dangle loosely overhead. To move through safely, the drone was designed with a slim body and multiple strategically placed thrusters that allow full directional control. It can travel forward, backward, and sideways, or simply hang motionless in the water. Skilled operators aboard the surface vessel guide every movement in real time through a live video feed, making each call with care to prevent any damage to either the wreck or the drone itself. Fitted with ultra-high-definition cameras, the drone records extraordinary levels of detail, picking out things like carved engravings on old furniture or the worn surface of a forgotten suitcase. Certain cameras deploy lasers to scan the surroundings and build precise three-dimensional models of the ship's interior. These digital reconstructions let researchers examine the Titanic from a distance, cutting down on the need for repeated physical dives and helping preserve the delicate environment. A tether runs from the drone back up to the surface ship, delivering continuous power and transmitting data without delay. That cable is essentially the mission's lifeline, guaranteeing no information goes missing and allowing the drone to remain submerged for long stretches of time. Artificial intelligence provides an added layer of protection by helping keep the drone stable and steering it away from collisions when underwater currents suddenly change direction. With the drone fully prepared and performing well, the team now had a machine capable of reaching corners of the Titanic that had sat in complete darkness for well over a century. What waited inside would push both technology and human comprehension to their edges. As the drone slipped into the Titanic's interior, the live feed revealed a world that had been shut away for more than 100 years. The tight opening gave way to dim corridors where no person had walked since 1912. The drone's light sliced through the blackness, exposing buckled hallways and railings thick with rust. Every slow, careful movement kicked up drifting clouds of silt that swirled through the water, making progress both delicate and precarious. Certain sections of the wreck had been completely undone. Walls had caved inward, and ceilings hung at sharp, threatening angles, creating real risks for the drone. Other areas, though, were strikingly well preserved. Researchers noted that near freezing water temperatures combined with minimal oxygen at those depths had dramatically slowed decay, leaving some rooms in an eerily undisturbed state. In these spaces, time appeared to have simply stopped. Chairs still stood upright, tables remained exactly where they had been placed, and dishes lay scattered across the floor of what was once a dining area. A number of suitcases and personal belongings were also visible, offering a haunting window into lives that had been cut short on that fateful night. The grand staircase, once a breathtaking emblem of elegance and wealth, appeared on the monitors as little more than a rusted skeleton. Long trailing formations of rust and bacteria, known as rusticles, hung from its remains like fragile threads. Though much of the structure had given way, its original outline was still identifiable. Seeing it reduced to this state was a powerful reminder of the gulf between the Titanic's magnificent past and its devastating end. Working with the drone's advanced cameras and laser scanning technology, the team set about constructing detailed three-dimensional models of the ship's interior spaces. These digital maps gave scientists the ability to observe how various sections of the wreck were breaking down and to flag areas at serious risk of total collapse. It was the most thorough look inside the Titanic ever accomplished without physically disturbing a single part of the site. Then, in a section of the ship that exploration had never previously reached, the drone's lights landed on something deeply unsettling. Beneath a thick accumulation of debris, there appeared to be a sealed doorway, its frame looking strangely undamaged given the destruction all around it. The edges were unusually clean, almost suggesting that whatever lay beyond had somehow been deliberately shielded from the devastation that had overtaken the rest of the ship. A faint trail of disturbed silt seemed to drift outward from the gap, as though something had shifted or stirred just behind it at some point. The operators sat, watching in tense, wordless silence. Some speculated it might lead to storage areas or crew compartments, while others quietly whispered that it could conceal something far more unsettling. Nobody was ready to put that idea to the test. With no reliable method to access it safely, they marked the spot for a future visit and pressed on, leaving that sealed space exactly as they found it. For the time being, the find only deepened the growing air of mystery. It hinted that the Titanic still sheltered secrets buried far within its broken hull, just waiting for someone to bring them to light. But something about that realization felt deeply uncomfortable. This was no longer simply a matter of history or curiosity. The further the team pushed inward, the stronger their feeling grew that what lay ahead could be far darker and more troubling than anything they had previously considered. That possibility pushed them toward a hard question. How deep should they really go in their search for the truth? And at what moment would their exploration begin to cross into territory that disturbed those who never made it home? Ethics beneath the waves. The Titanic has always carried a weight that goes well beyond that of an ordinary sunken vessel. It is a place saturated with history, raw emotion, and ongoing debate. From the very beginning, the team guiding the drone mission understood they were not simply studying a chapter of the past, but moving through a space that countless people regard as hallowed ground. That understanding shaped the planning of every single phase of the operation and guided every decision about what to share with the wider world. Before any footage or imagery was made available to the public, the group went through long and difficult discussions. Certain members argued that showing the wreck exactly as it appeared was essential for the sake of historical truth. Others were concerned that particular scenes would cause real distress to the living relatives of those who had sailed aboard the Titanic. The group wrestled over how much of the wreck ought to be shown. Ultimately, they agreed to apply careful filters to whatever would be released publicly. According to various reports, images that appeared to show remains or deeply personal items were held back out of consideration for those still connected to the tragedy. The team also reached out to families whose ancestors had been on board the ship. Those conversations produced a wide range of responses. Some families expressed genuine gratitude that their loved ones were being honored through careful documentation and exploration. Others felt troubled, voicing the belief that the Titanic should simply be left alone beneath the sea. These opposing views added layers of responsibility to the researchers' work, making their mission as much about human compassion as it was about scientific discovery. Respect for the wreck extended beyond decisions about footage alone. It also touched on the question of physical care. The Titanic has rested underwater for well over a century, and its structure has grown extremely delicate. Even the slightest disturbance can trigger sections of it to give way. The drone was guided with remarkable precision, moving slowly and with great deliberateness to avoid brushing against surfaces or unsettling the sediment below. Every single movement was carefully watched to make sure the site was left as undisturbed as possible. This tension between the drive to explore and the duty to show reverence weighed heavily on everyone involved. They understood that their work would shape the way future generations think about the Titanic. As the mission moved forward, that careful and measured approach would soon face a real challenge. The drone started revealing evidence that pointed towards something deeper, discoveries that had the potential to shake long-standing beliefs about what truly unfolded on that freezing night in 1912. Clues to the final hours. The footage the drone captured began to shed new light on details surrounding the Titanic's descent that historians had only ever theorized about over many decades. For years, those who studied the disaster believed they had a solid grasp of how the ship came apart and slipped beneath the surface. Survivor testimonies, earlier examinations of the wreck, and computer-generated reconstructions had together shaped a widely accepted account of events. Yet the fresh imagery gathered from deep within the ship called many of those assumptions into question. As the drone moved through different sections of the wreck, the researchers noticed something that genuinely surprised them. Certain areas that were long believed to have been completely obliterated were actually still standing. Certain corridors and rooms were far better preserved than anyone had anticipated, while sections believed to be solid had given way entirely. This surprising combination of ruin and survival hinted that the sinking had unfolded in ways far more complicated than previously understood. The team methodically studied the patterns of warped steel and shattered beams. The way debris had settled offered clues about the forces that tore the vessel apart. By charting these patterns, the researchers were able to understand how the ship's structure had buckled under enormous pressure. Several corridors, for instance, were filled with objects that appeared to have been swept into position by a fierce surge of water. This pointed to how flooding had raced through the ship, overtaking one compartment after another in rapid sequence. The objects found inside the wreck carried their own quiet history, held in place by the freezing, oxygen-depleted depths. As the drone's lights cut through the blackness, they revealed belongings that had sat undisturbed since that night back in 1912. A pair of leather shoes rested side by side in the silt, their forms perfectly maintained while everything surrounding them had long since deteriorated. Close by, a suitcase lay half-buried with its clasps still fastened, almost as though someone had set it down just moments earlier. Dishes and glassware lay scattered across what had once served as a dining area, a surprising number of them unbroken. A single wine bottle stood upright, its cork still firmly in place. These were not simply remnants of a ship, they were proof of lives cut short. Forensic experts reviewing the footage argued that the positioning of these personal effects revealed far more than random disorder. In one passageway, a row of shoes stretched toward a collapsed doorway, as though a group of people had been making a desperate attempt to get out in the ship's final moments. In another space, luggage had been piled unevenly against a wall, apparently shoved there by a powerful wave of water as the vessel went down. These unsettling details spoke not only of desperation, but of the overwhelming force that had surged through the ship. Some researchers noted that patterns like these shed light on the order in which compartments flooded, and the paths passengers may have followed as they tried to escape. The further the drone descended, the more apparent it became that the Titanic was far more than a sunken wreck. It was a frozen record of catastrophe, with every object contributing to the broader story. These findings were not merely about what came to rest at the bottom of the ocean, but about the people who had once held these very things in their hands. Not every detail aligned neatly with the established account of what happened. In certain areas, walls had been pushed inward, as though something had struck them from the outside with tremendous force. Nearby, beams had bent in opposing directions, pointing to a sudden and uneven break rather than a gradual collapse. One small storage compartment was particularly unsettling. Heavy items, including a metal safe, were found wedged against the ceiling, as if they had been hurled upward by a violent rush of water or some kind of powerful internal event. Researchers suggested these inconsistencies hint at things that still have no clear explanation, implying the ship's last moments were far more chaotic than history has ever captured. The new findings left the research team with more questions than answers. What emerged was a portrait of a disaster defined by speed, chaos, and forces beyond imagination. These discoveries set the stage for what was still to come. As the drone pushed further into areas never previously explored, it drew closer to a sealed section of the wreck that would hold the most startling find of all. The footage that followed left the entire team speechless. Moving deeper into the interior, the drone reached a part of the wreck that had been closed off by fallen beams and dense accumulations of silt. To penetrate the space, the operators guided the drone with extraordinary care, threading it through tight openings while remaining alert to the threat of sudden collapse. Every movement carried real danger. One miscalculation could compromise the fragile structure or leave the drone permanently lost inside. Back aboard the research vessel in the control room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The screens showed nothing except drifting particles and an impenetrable darkness. All at once, the lights fell upon a wall, and then an opening that revealed a concealed chamber. This was a space that had remained completely undisturbed since 1912. The room looked largely preserved. Furniture had been knocked over, shoes and luggage were strewn across the floor, and dishes rested exactly where they had landed on that fateful night. The icy water and absence of oxygen had slowed any deterioration, keeping the space sealed like a time capsule. It felt as though the past had been quietly waiting to be rediscovered. The drone's lights moved in a slow sweep across the chamber until they landed on something in the far corner. At first, everyone assumed it was just more debris. Then the image came into focus, and every single person standing in the control room fell completely silent. What appeared on the screen could not be dismissed as shadows or contorted metal. These were human remains. The figure was small. The shape of the limbs made it undeniable that this was a child. The body rested slightly curled to one side, with fragments of clothing still draped over the skeletal frame. As the drone inched closer, a second form came into view just a short distance away. This other figure was positioned so near that, according to several team members, it looked as though the two had been holding on to one another as life quietly faded. Their bones were not intertwined, but the way they were arranged suggested a final gesture of comfort in those closing moments. Nobody said a word. Some operators raised their hands to their mouths in disbelief, while others turned their faces away from their screens, visibly overwhelmed. What they were looking at went beyond tragic. It was deeply, profoundly disturbing. For more than a century, these children had remained sealed in darkness, hidden within a section of the ship that had never been reached before. Then, as the camera shifted slightly, it exposed something just a short distance away that made the discovery even more unsettling. Partially buried beneath the silt was a leather shoe, one that clearly belonged to an adult. The stitching was still faintly visible despite everything time had done, and the shoe's surface was waterlogged and darkened, yet it held together. Its presence told a story that no one wanted to say aloud. The find suggested the children had not been entirely alone. An adult had been with them in those final moments, perhaps a parent or someone responsible for their care. But where had that person gone? The body had vanished, leaving only that single shoe as evidence of their presence. The existence of the adult shoe stirred deeply troubling questions. Hushed conversations spread among the researchers as various theories began to take shape. Had the adult perished and been carried off by shifting currents, leaving the children behind as the wreck settled deeper into the silt? Or, as one distressed team member cautiously suggested, had the person fled in the chaos, making the unbearable decision to seek their own survival while the children remained trapped below deck? Whatever had unfolded that night, those small bodies and that lone shoe stood as silent witnesses to a story filled with desperation, terror, and choices too devastating to fully contemplate. The team was acutely aware of how sensitive this discovery truly was. Even the mere suggestion of human remains was bound to stir significant controversy. After lengthy discussions, they collectively agreed to keep the majority of the footage private. Only a small number of carefully chosen still images were preserved for historical research, while everything else was secured away. According to certain accounts, not even every team member was permitted to view the unedited recordings in full. As the drone made its way back through the wreck and began rising toward the surface, a profound stillness settled over the control room. The discovery had altered everything. The sealed doorway that had been explored earlier had concealed a truth that would remain with the team indefinitely. The world might eventually press for answers, but for now, the complete story stayed buried alongside the Titanic, locked away in the darkness beneath the sea. As the drone broke the surface and was carefully brought back aboard the ship, the mission came to a quiet and subdued conclusion. The team gathered together in silence, each person attempting to process what they had witnessed far below the ocean. The footage captured inside the Titanic was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. Once back on land, the information was initially shared only within select academic circles. Marine scientists and historians were brought into private sessions where they reviewed the data away from public eyes. The team held back from sharing full details openly, worried about sensationalism or things being taken out of context. Certain researchers debated the importance of what had been found, while others called for patience until every piece could be properly verified. Still, as tends to happen with discoveries of this scale, bits of information began to slip through. A handful of blurry images and partial data quietly appeared online, reportedly passed along by someone with ties to the research team. Those leaks were taken down quickly, but not before being copied and reposted across obscure forums and social media pages. The official team said very little, putting out only carefully phrased statements that neither confirmed nor denied what people were hearing. That silence made everything feel even more mysterious. Beyond academic circles, the wider world was left sitting with tantalizing clues and no clear answers, uncertain about what was real and what was simply rumor. The discovery brought an old debate back to the surface. Should people continue venturing into the Titanic's interior, or should the site simply be left undisturbed? Some within the scientific community believe ongoing exploration is necessary, given that the wreck is gradually deteriorating and crucial information could be lost before long. Others, including various religious voices, have urged that the location be treated with the reverence of hallowed ground. Relatives of those who perished have shared deeply mixed reactions as well. Some felt grateful for the thoughtful preservation of historical memory, while others carried a sense of hurt and quiet outrage at the thought of cameras passing through a space where so many lives came to an end. Whether this recent mission marks a new beginning or a final chapter remains an open question. What cannot be disputed is that the wreck keeps asking humanity to face its history, its reach for greatness, and its duty to honor those who are no longer here,